everyone. Welcome to Writers of the World. We have an absolutely fascinating panel with us today with writers from very different genres. Natalie Devora writes about race and identity. She is the author of Black Girl, White Skin, A Life in Stories. She is a 2019 featured author through American Association of University Women, AAUW, Alameda, California. Kari Bovee is an award-winning writer, and she writes about empowered women in history, horses, and real-life historical events. She is the author of the Annie Oakley Mystery Series, and her new book, Peccadillo at the Palace, was published in 2019. Keturah Kendrick is a traveler, educator, podcast host, and author of the collection No Thanks, Black, Female, and Living in the Martyr-Free Zone. She's an important thought leader providing insight on Black American women who choose non-traditional paths in life. Jasper Trey is an educator, lover of life, and beginning novelist, starting with the Harris Legacy series, who has published 3 books. She is currently working on a young adult science fiction novel and is a proponent of strong female leads and men who can let them be empowered. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going to touch briefly on Mother's Day and then discuss how each author's travels and experiences in the field of education have influenced and enriched their lives as writers. So the first question is, can you talk about your decision either to have or not have children and how you feel that fits in with your life path?
I chose to have a family via adoption and adopted my daughter from birth. And because I work with families, it was a natural part of my life that I would have a family at some point. And I chose adoption because it was the best route for me and for us.
Interestingly enough, I've known since I was a child that I would not be having children, either by adoption or childbirth. So I've chosen a path of being child-free by choice, mostly because, much like Natalie, I listened to my voice. And I knew that motherhood was not a role that I desired. And it's fit well into my life because I think for any woman, listening to your voice can be difficult because we're often socialized not to. So it's given me the freedom, the lifestyle that I have truly desired. So yeah, it's been this one of the wisest choices I've made, actually.
Yeah, I chose to have children, and I always knew that I would have children. I don't know really where it came from, but like Keturah, it has been the best thing in my life to have children, as it is for her to not have had children. And I think it's a we live in a society today where those choices are there. It's all okay, no matter what you decide to do. And I think that's very empowering, and I think it's wonderful. And so I'm pleased with my decision, and I'm sure people are pleased with theirs.
And I'm sure you've raised wonderful children, Kari.
Thank you. I'm quite proud of them.
I actually knew, I think it was always in the background that I would have kids. And when my oldest brother had his first child, I was just going to college in a town with them. And so in some ways I was her second mother because I was always there with them, and it just became an extension. And so it's a natural part of growing up for me with my background and things like that. And the first time I tried to write a novel, when I went back to read it, it was so young and immature that I knew I needed to do something to broaden my horizons other than just travel or something along those lines. I needed responsibility. I needed things like that to show me some things. And getting married and having kids, and I still feel like I'm 16. I'm a very responsible 16 at 37, but it has definitely changed me for the better, because I needed the change in order to make the stories that I can make now. I knew it early on. I couldn't have articulated it at that time. It's only now when you ask me a question like that I can actually come out and be like, oh, wait a second. I was an immature little kid, and I still kind of am, but I'm a responsible, immature little kid.
I like the way you put that. I think I'm kind of 37, but I'm not quite sure.
I think we're all like that inside. So I know you all have a lot in common with regards to your connection to education as well. Can you tell us more about your background and current activities in this regard, and if this influenced your books at all?
Yeah, when I was in college, I studied English literature, and I went to my professor. I had a million different majors, and I went to one of my professors and I said, I think I'm going to major in English literature. And he said, that's fabulous. You're never going to make any money. He said, you could probably teach, or you could, do something like that. So I thought, well, that's okay. So when I got out of college, I had a technical writing job, but then our family moved and I needed a job. So I looked into education, and I taught middle school, and I also taught first grade. And then, it's just sort of snowballed into, I taught at an alternative learning school. And then I became an educational consultant for other teachers. And then I joined on with a firm that produced educational software, and I became a consultant for them and taught teachers how to use the software. And the software was to help kids learn to read, and especially kids who were like ESL kids or kids who had problems reading. So it was really very gratifying. And so education's always sort of been a part of who I am, whether I'm a learner or a teacher. And the writing just sort of fell right into that. And I really enjoyed particularly the junior high kids, because the middle school kids, because I taught writing. And the wonderful thing about writing, and that I could portray to the kids, was that when you write, you can be whoever you want to be. You can live in any world you want to live in. Your imagination is king, and the sky's the limit. So that was very empowering for me to teach them, and also very empowering for them. I felt like it kind of opened a door for them.
Wow. Well, it's kind of my career path is very similar to yours, Kari. I've been teaching for about a very long time, for about 14 years. And I too have taught middle and high school all around the world. I started off in New York City, which is where I spent most of my career. Then I taught in the international school world in Rwanda, and I'm currently in Shanghai, China. And I wanted to teach. I was doing sort of creative writing workshops in New York City's public schools, and encountered a school that really fit my mission as a person, as an artist really well. So I went to graduate school to become certified to teach English and English and literature in order to teach at this school. And at year number 14, what I find interesting, especially you mentioned having taught, I think it's funny you taught middle school and then the babies, the first graders.
I much preferred middle school. People think I'm crazy, but I much preferred middle school.
I prefer middle school too, because I had a professor when I was at NYU for teacher school who said the truest thing about middle school age students, that they're not well. They're just not well. Like they're at that very bizarre stage where they're just not well, but they're also very honest, even when they're not telling the truth. They're so honest. So I can identify with being in this place where nothing feels right. Your body doesn't feel right. Your social interactions don't feel right. Your friendship groups aren't quite right. And there's a level of rawness in that. And you're not really good at hiding that you don't feel quite right. So I think teaching middle school mostly, I've taught high school too, but mostly my background is in year 8, 8th grade especially. It's made me much more observant about how we reach adulthood scarred in some ways. Yeah. And it's given me some great observational sort of a little window into humanity, into how humans operate, and some really crazy stories, because I'm sure Kari has many, where you're standing in class wondering, I really wish there was someone else to witness this. Is this really happening? So it's just their middle school students are hilarious, so honest, and there's like a rawness to it that gives you some great fodder, some great fodder for your writing.
Right. Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly.
Completely. From a also junior high to high school teacher. So I've taught 7th grade math through calculus, and next year I get to experience teaching 6th graders. So that'll be interesting. I haven't done that one yet. And I would say I completely agree with you on middle school. I didn't think I would like it. I got my advanced math so I could teach calculus because that's what I wanted to teach, and that's who I wanted to teach. And I had to teach 7th grade through 12th grade. I had to teach all the grades in order to teach at the school I wanted to teach at. And I started realizing I really like the lower grades. And then I retired from teaching, and a K-8 school called me and said, we've heard you retired. Would you please come teach for us? And so I went to interview with them and left with a job, because you have to know my counselor. That's just what happens. She talks you into it. And I love it. It was 6 years ago, and it's the best thing that I've done. And I say that, 13 out of my 14 years of teaching have been in 100% poverty schools. And so I've seen a lot of the heartbreak and all the things that can go wrong. And of course, I've seen all the things that can go right too. I've buried 4 students in successive years, 3 out of the same class that I was sponsoring. So I had to go through it with those kids 3 times. And then at the same time, out of 2 of my classes, I have one that's getting her PhD in microbiology, and her sister is in med school right now. And, they write me letters, just, it's so great that you were our teacher and stuff. And it helps with the intensity of emotions that you can write whenever you have to, hold a senior's hand that her best friend just died, in a car wreck, or you can go up to your student and be like, oh my God, I get to take your senior pictures because you're graduating from college right now. And it just goes into the whole scope of what you can write when you see so many different lives throughout education.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah,
Well,
really cool. Yeah.
Well, I come to this from the early childhood form of teaching. I started my career working with a therapeutic preschool, which essentially was really putting children who had experienced trauma, children from age 2 through 5, providing them with a safe environment to develop trust again, as well as to, my role was also to provide parent education. From then, what I discovered is I really like the form of parent education. And over time, I think I've been in this field now for about 25 years. And over time, I evolved into doing everything from being a newborn care specialist and working with these wonderful new parents with these beautiful little babies that they have no idea what to do with. So I come in and provide them with a sense of calm and knowledge to be able to guide them, and hopefully by the time I'm done working with them, they have the security and confidence that they need to know that they have all the tools at their fingertips to be amazing parents. And what I do now, and having moved forward from that, is now what I am doing is providing professional development workshops for women who are in the nanny industry. And by doing so, it's really empowering those women to recognize what their skill sets are, to give them specific topics and how to work with parents so that they're able to do their jobs professionally and present themselves professionally. And conversely, when we're working with parents, we're working with parents to help them understand what it means to hire someone to come in to work with your family. Because they're not just working with your child, they're working with the entire family. And what it also means to be an equitable employer. So all of those things definitely add fuel for my writing. They give me a lot more compassion for my parents, because, they just did what they did. I also come from a family of educators. My mother is a retired high school math and science teacher. And my daughter works in educational marketing. So we are continuing that legacy.
Family business.
That's it. That is it.
And you also all have a passion for travel. Can you tell us about some of your favorite travels, some of the places you've been, and some of the things you've experienced?
I've done a lot of traveling. One of the reasons why I left the States about 5 years ago was really because I wanted to see more of the world, and I couldn't do that just on school holidays in New York City. So I lived in Rwanda in East Africa for 2 years, and in those 2 years, I was able to get in about 13 African countries that I visited, so I was gone a lot. But I will say, I've said this to people many times, and I've brainwashed all of the children I've taught around the world. New York City is the greatest city in the world. And the only city I have encountered in my travels that I would permanently quit New York City for is Berlin. I love Berlin. It's just the coolest. And I spent exactly 7 days there, so I feel like I can confidently speak on the superbness of Berlin. It is the coolest, the hippest, just like a really good sort of artsy, cultural, modern city. But yeah, I've been traveling a lot these last few years and have seen a great deal of monuments and interacted with a lot of really cool people. And particularly living in Africa for 2 years was very comforting. It's such a culturally rich continent, and each country can be a book in of itself. So yeah, very big passion for seeing the world.
That's great. Well, I've done some extensive traveling as an adult. I didn't do a lot as a kid, but one of my favorite trips was my late father and I had a passion for history that we shared. And one of the trips we took was called the Journey of Odysseus. So it was like an archaeological tour, and it was actually on a small cruise ship. And so we followed the journey of Odysseus. So that was really fascinating. We got to see Troy, and we were with an archaeologist who had been excavating Troy for the past 15, 20 years. So that was a super fascinating trip. And another one of my favorite trips is, well, several trips, is I've been to England many times. And I started out sort of researching the Arthurian legends. And so my mother took me on a trip where we sort of went to all the places that the Arthurian legends took place, which was really, really kind of fun. And then I became very interested in the Tudors and started studying them, which was fascinating. And I have a book that it's partially written about Lady Jane Grey, who was the 9 days queen. She was only queen for 9 days, and she was executed. So that's kind of fascinating. But more currently, in my Annie Oakley series, the second book in the series, which is Piccadilly at the Palace, the Wild West show actually went to England to celebrate and to perform for Queen Victoria for her Golden Jubilee. And so I thought this was such a cool thing that I discovered when I was writing the first Annie Oakley book in doing my research, was that they actually took, you know, all these animals, 180 horses, 200 performers, buffalo, bear, deer, elk. I mean, they took all of this over for the Queen's Jubilee to perform for her. And it was just a great way to mesh my love of American history with my love of English history. And so it really became quite a fun story for me. So, you know, travel does, anytime I go abroad, I love seeping myself into the history of the place, because that's what I'm really interested in. What were these people thinking? What were these people doing? I love touching walls that, you know, people centuries ago touched, or seeing, you know, cool monuments. And so that's sort of how travel has worked into my writing. It always finds a way in.
Oh, good. I have traveled to eat, if we're being 100% honest.
Travel to eat?
I travel to eat. I'm originally from New Orleans, so I think about food an insane amount of time. So literally, I choose my destinations on what I'm going to eat. So I know that is not as intellectual.
I like
No,
you.
but it's all
like
good.
it.
It's all good.
Yeah. Mine started, well, I've always wanted to travel. The archaeology route was there. My mom kind of talked me out of it because I wanted to study archaeology, but it took other forms. So at 18, I decided to take off for Europe. I found the cheapest place I could fly into. I talked a friend into going with me. We backpacked from Paris down to Nice and back, but kind of like you were saying with touching things, which, by the way, that's a funny story about the Louvre. We can't get into it right now, but I did. Yeah, that was not good. But Paris it was the first time I was ever confronted with something that was so much older than anything else I'd ever dealt with. In Oklahoma, where I grew up and live, the towns are at that point 80 years old. That's what you're dealing with. And so being in Paris was so, in some ways, overwhelming, because you walk into Notre Dame. If I even said it right, I'm an Okie, so I don't know. And it kind of takes you over, just not just in the architecture, but just the serenity that you get in a building like that, but the serenity of the whole city. And it started just me wanting to travel. After that, I got married, had kids, so it was a while before I got back. Sorry, I was south in Munich, not in Berlin. I took my husband for his 40th birthday to Oktoberfest, and it was fabulous. It was a whirlwind. And when you start laughing with absolute strangers because they just became your best friend because you sat down at the table with them, it is the most unimaginable feeling that you have this connection with someone that comes from a completely different place, a completely different mindset, but you just became best friends because you sat down at the same table, because everybody's going to be that way.
It kind of restores your faith in humanity, just how,
It does.
because I often travel alone, and what I find interesting, people are always concerned that I'm going to end up dead or trafficked or something, like there's a venue for 44-year-old women in human trafficking. Anyway, so people are always surprised that I return unmolested and alive. And one of the things I said to them, that I feel like, generally speaking, I have had more experiences where people were looking out for me all over the world, on tours, when I'm just walking around exploring on my own. It's just like there is an immense amount of human compassion, I think, around the world, that you're right. You sit down and all of a sudden you're talking to the stranger and you're Facebooking each other like weeks later because you became friends. It truly does restore your faith in the goodness of people, I think.
Yeah. It really does. It plays into that with, after my mom died and I was in my mourning, I guess, my husband decided we needed to have a grand adventure. So he took me to Mexico, and we drove from Cancun to Tulum. And what they tell you when you do something like that is you need to take $50 bills in case you get stopped, because you're supposed to bribe the officials. I do not bribe people. I try to be a very law-abiding citizen, and it gave me complete, he definitely got me out of my comfort zone by driving in Mexico. But one of the best things about that trip was that we are eating tacos in a stand in the alley, and we were fine. You're always told, in Mexico, it's going to be, you're going to get sick, you're going to do this and that, and we were fine. It's only when we went to the tourist place, the last night we were there, that we got sick for 2 weeks after we got home. So it does, just like finding strangers at a table that become your best friends, you learn to trust the food that everybody else is going to when you're there. It's a trust issue that, I have problems with anybody. And it definitely helped my trust issues and figuring out how to deal with those, and how my characters in my books can deal with those same things. They definitely play into my books, their insecurities, their ways of dealing with all of those different situations.
Well, I too have this just joy of passion for traveling. I think the first time I went to Paris, I was 19 and went back at 25, which was amazing to turn 25 in Paris. It was, I was there for 6 weeks. I was working, which really I wasn't, but exactly.
Normal work. Okay.
Yeah, it was work, and my French improved dramatically with being there for that extensive amount of time. And since then, I just, I'm definitely a Francophone. I know this. And I'm someone who actually travels to France annually, mainly because I have godchildren who live in the South. I think like an hour or so outside of Bordeaux. And separate from that, I'd say my most, the trip that affected me most in all ways was a trip I took to Tanzania in 2015. And I went as a Westerner as a woman of color with albinism to the first Pan-African Albinism Conference. And it was absolutely everything. And primarily it was just this amazing experience of relationships. The relationships with people were just phenomenal. To meet so many people from so many different African nations was life-changing.
I can imagine.
And I left, I was in Tanzania for I think 2.5 weeks, and then I went to Kenya, which was also phenomenal. And I'd say the best experience I had in Kenya was that a friend of mine arranged a private safari for me. So it was just me and the operator. So, and he was amazing. And the thing is here's the thing. I travel a lot alone as well. And I travel as someone who's also legally blind, and I don't use definable equipment. I don't use a cane. I don't have a dog. I just use other technology. And that has really pushed me to be able to say, I can do anything I want to do. I just need to be prepared for that. And that certainly shows up in my writing, because I write memoir. It's like, I can do anything I want to do. It's a matter of having the courage and the tenacity to accomplish that. So writing certainly has it works in tandem. The travel and the writing work in tandem with one another.
Definitely. Wow. So it's interesting that like when you say it's taught you that you can do whatever you want, so you just have to be prepared. I that really stuck with me and stayed with me, because I think, like, I too write memoir, and I blog a lot, and on my podcast I talk a lot about traveling, especially traveling solo as a single woman. And you take for granted how many people really believe that there are barriers and what you've come to think of is just simple life. Like you said, if you prepare, you can to go abroad, you can be fine. And it's one of the things that I think the older I've gotten and the more I've accomplished, how I take for granted how privileged my perspective on the world is, especially how that comes out in my writing too. Because yeah, I mean, if you're prepared, if you really have a passion for something, it can happen. There really are no barriers except the ones you sort of dream up in your head. So that's well said. Thank you for saying that. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Publishing a book takes an unusual amount of tenacity, and so many people have a book they're writing but never get to the point of publication. Can you describe where you get your strength and inspiration from, both as an author and in life?
I jump in head first. Literally, I jump in head first. It kind of annoys most people. I do actually think about what I'm doing as I'm running for the cliff, and I have enough time to stop. And if I think that I will survive jumping off the cliff, I go ahead and jump off and I see what happens. And if I think I won't, I stop, and it usually doesn't happen. So for me, it was that. I decided to self-publish first because I needed to do that part. I did all the editing. I've worked with an editor. I've done all these things, but it's allowed me to see all sorts of aspects of the publishing and community building and how you can get the name of your book out, the merchandising, the marketing. I'm not going to say that I've done it alone. I do have writer friends. I do have a friend that has his own publishing company. He's just not, my book is not right for his. So I've definitely had some advice along the way. My next book, I do plan to try and do traditional. If I had done it traditional first and tried to rack up all the rejections that you always hear about, I probably wouldn't have done it. So like I said, I dove in head first because I like to punish myself for some reason.
I'm going to just piggyback on that. I also believe in, I come from a place of like, you know what, if not me, then who?
Exactly.
So I felt that it was my story in particular that I needed to tell it versus having someone else do that on my behalf. And I also chose the self-publishing route for my first book because I wanted it was time for the book to be in the world. And I knew that if I attempted to go the traditional route, it would have taken another year to 2 years for it to see print. And I learned a lot through the process. I too am incredibly grateful for writing community. I'm a part of 2 different writing communities, and they both assist me in different capacities, and I appreciate that. And now, as I am at the beginning of laying out my second book project, I feel like I have what I need knowledge-wise to pursue a more traditional publishing route.
I would say too, just as an extension of Jasper and Natalie's comments, I think almost identical to Natalie, what keeps me going is the realization that if you don't tell your own story, someone else will, and they will get it wrong. And you have no one to blame for the wrongness of your story being out there but you. I think, again, through traveling, through living abroad these last 5 years, it became clear to me that what I thought was just Keturah being Keturah, just my personal choices. They're a bit non-traditional, but no big deal, that they're very political. And I was not aware of that angle of it until I started meeting women from all across other cultures who didn't feel that they had license to make the same choices as I have. I am single by choice. Marriage doesn't appeal to me. I'm not against it, but it doesn't necessarily appeal to me as an institution. I have chosen not to have children. I have done what most Black American women, especially Black American women from the South, don't feel is their right to do. I have moved completely away from my family. Like, I've left the country. And even before I left the country, I left New Orleans to go to New York City. So I've centered myself in my life for 44 years. And that is not a minor thing. It's not a simple, easy thing for a lot of women to claim. And it became clear to me the more I talked to women as I traveled around the world that that story needed to exist. There needed to be documentation of my story. Whether or not you choose my path is irrelevant, but there needs to be on record in black and white this Black American story. So when I've gotten frustrated with the writing process, I chose the hybrid press, which is a combination of self-publishing and traditional. When I got frustrated with all of the things involved after writing the book, because I remember one of my favorite writers saying once, writing the book is the easiest part. And I thought he was high. Like, he must be high. That's crazy. Now that I've written the book, and I'm going through this process of marketing and getting it out, I get what he's saying now. So when I've gotten frustrated or annoyed because it wasn't as simple or clear cut as I thought it should be, that's been the thing that has kept me going, that this story, there needs to be evidence that you existed for someone who is trying to exist as you, but doesn't know that she has permission to do so.
Well, I've come to writing I came to it from a very, very young age. I've been writing stories since I was in the 3rd grade. It's almost like a calling for me. I've been drawn to this journey from the get-go, and everything in my life has sort of led me to this. I've been doing it for a long time. I've done a lot of different kinds of writing, nonfiction, article writing, newsletters, technical writing. And it's just always been sort of a part of my DNA. And when I was a young mother, my husband was traveling a lot. I had made the decision to stay home and with the kids, and I was going crazy because I needed the intellectual stimulation. So I started writing novels. And it took me a long time. I was on a long journey to traditionally publish. I had a couple of agents. When the kids got a little bit older, I didn't have as much time for my writing. So I kind of gave it up for a while. But when my youngest was a junior in high school, I got back into it and really felt the need to see my books published. And so I've been on that path. It's been great. I've really enjoyed it. I feel like it's something that, regardless of the success of my books, it's something I'm going to always do. It's just who I am. And it's hard sometimes, but those years that I wasn't writing, I mourned it. There was a big hole in my life. And so I'm doing it again, and I'm thrilled and loving it. And I've done I too am doing the hybrid publishing. I think we're sister presses, you and I.
Oh, are she writes?
I'm with Spark Press, yeah.
Oh, hi, how you doing, sis?
Yeah, I thought I saw that. And so, for a variety of different reasons, but I am going to go independent on my next. I've got a series that's going to be coming out, and I am going to go independent on that and see how it works, and just, see the difference. So, yeah, it's been an interesting journey, but I'm still on it, and it's nowhere near over.
So what is your writing practice, and how have you grown as a writer?
I wish I could say I had a practice. I want to be able to say,
right now.
You know how they used to say, I don't know if they still say this, because I've been writing like Kari as long as I can remember. I've been in workshops, I've had writing communities, and they say, you have to write every day. And I still haven't gotten to that point yet, although I've been writing for like almost 20 years. I can say that I try my best to be authentic and to be honest. I write nonfiction, I write personal essays. I've been blogging for about 10 years. So I write about myself a lot. I often put it into context and it becomes cultural critique, but it starts from a place of something happened to me. And I feel like the thing that happened to me, again, is political in nature, although it's a personal thing. So I go from a place of authenticity and usefulness, because having the same conversation I would have with my friends over cocktails at happy hour doesn't necessarily yield anything useful to be putting out there in the blogosphere or to actually publish. So usefulness that I feel is going to resonate with other women across the world. But I wish I had, like, every morning at 5 a.m. I wake up and then I write 5,000 words. Okay, so I don't do that. I get some stuff out and I do my best to, like, not to let a long period of time go before I've written something, but mostly just trying to be authentic and useful in what I put out there to the world.
You know, I would agree with that. I have a lot of writer friends who have like a word limit that they have to hit every day, or, you know, they write for a certain number of hours. And I've tried to do that, and I find it very stifling. Like, it has to come organically. Now, that doesn't mean that I go weeks and weeks without writing. I have to do it. But it has to come to me in a much more relaxed way. So, for instance, instead of saying I'll write from 9 to 11, I'll say, okay, you know, tomorrow morning I'm going to work on my book. That could mean thinking about it. That could mean researching. That could mean plotting out a scene, or something like that. I try to work on my current, you know, work in progress. I try to work on that almost every day if I can, in some way. And it may just be in the car driving somewhere thinking about what's going to happen next in the story. So I, you know, like you, I wish I could say, oh yes, I write every day from, you know, 8 to 5 or whatever, which I think is crazy. I don't know how anyone can do that, but people
have
do.
A job.
Well, yeah, and it's like I've got a lot of other things in my life. I have horses; they need a lot of attention. I've got, you know, my kids, my husband, the whole thing, and so I don't want to be chained to my desk. I don't want that. That would kill me. That would kill my creativity. So I do it when I can. I make it a priority. It's my number, you know, one of my number one priorities, and I find that I do a better job if I don't restrict myself so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say, like both of you have said, that I don't believe in having word counts. I've tried it. It's really ineffective for me. And, you know, I'd say right now, the focus of what I'm doing is I'm actually organizing and planning out a new writing project in a way I've never done before, because it's going to require travel to 3 different countries. Mm-hmm. And I'm also applying for funding to be able to offset some of those costs. So it's a different process, but I'm enjoying this particular aspect of the process, because by doing it this way, it's allowing me to frame the book. And that's exciting to me. You know, the other thing that I am doing with my book, right, with my current book, is having as much of an opportunity to read publicly when that's possible. And, you know, I work relatively full time and have, you know, a fiance and you know,
Congratulations.
Lots of kids in the house at different points, like tonight. And so it's a balance. It's like trying to figure out the balance to make it work. And I'm committed. You know, I have a writing group that meets every 2 weeks. And so given that, I feel like that provides me some in-person, out of my house structured time for writing. And in between those places, those meetings, I have the freedom to create as I'm able to.
That's good. For me, because it goes along the same lines with family, with work, with farm life, there's not a lot of time, and it's hard to find the time. So I have a tendency to go through avoidance, first off, then guilt because I'm avoiding. And then I set a goal, and then I forget about the goal. And then I feel guilty because I forgot about the goal and didn't meet the goal. And then I try to forgive myself because I also, in that same amount of time, at some point, wrote a full chapter for the next book that I'm working on. And I try to remind myself that when the story has fully formed in my head, because I need to remind myself that I write in my head more than anything else, then when it's fully formed and it decides it's going to come out, it's going to come out. And I will find the time at that point to get my computer and to write it all down. And again, forgiveness to myself for not writing how everybody says you're supposed to write, because you are your own person. Mm-hmm. And you can't be anybody else. And when you try to be someone else is when you're unhappy. And so to be happy, I have to realize that I write chapters at a time. And so I might write one time a week, but I will write an entire 12 to 15 single-spaced chapter at a time. And so a lot of mine actually has to do with forgiveness, I think, of myself.
That's great.
And I just realized that.
Okay.
I'm learning so many things right now.
That's a win. Yeah. That's such a great win.
Teachable moments. We're all teachers. Teachable moments.
So the consensus seems to be prioritizing the creative process in a flexible way. That's fascinating.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, it's well said. That's exactly what we said. Yeah. I mean, I just think people have things. You have so much going on in life. And I mean, I personally count pleasure and interacting with your friends and family as a thing. It's not like it's right on the hierarchy of work, taking care of children, like pleasure and being able to have time to just be is another slot on the many things in life that one has to do. So I just kind of feel like writing I don't want to say that you shouldn't have discipline. Like if you're waiting to be inspired, I think it was Octavia Butler who said inspiration could be somewhere drunk in a corner and you wait for inspiration to come and show up. You ain't gonna never write nothing, right? So there has to be some sort of discipline to it, but the rigidity of the 5 to 8 p.m., the 5,000 words, I just feel like in the 21st century, when most people have so many balls in motion, I don't know how practical or doable that is for anyone, unless you truly are Toni Morrison and you have made a career, like you are a writer and that's all you have to do. I can see then maybe it being possible, but for where all the writers I know are, it doesn't seem feasible for that rigidity to exist.
You also have to live a life to be able to write about that life.
You got to have some wine. You got to eat some bacon. You got to you just have to.
I agree on all those points.
So what do you feel is the hardest thing about being an author and also the most wonderful thing?
The best thing is when someone reads my story. The worst thing is when someone reads my story. They're reading me. They're reading my heart. They're reading my soul for whenever I wrote that story. It doesn't matter if it's fiction or it's your memoir, it's you. And it's the best thing and it's the absolute worst thing at the exact same time.
So
I
true.
love it because I keep doing it.
So true.
It's so true. Well, I think because I produce a lot of work that's not necessarily written work. Like I have a podcast that I get connected to my audience much quicker and much more consistently than blogging and definitely writing a published book. And I do enjoy what Jasper is saying, the feedback that you get from people who say, oh, I have connected with your work, or I thought about something a bit differently because of your work, or I really just enjoyed the experience of interacting with your work. I enjoy that part. But I have to say, the part that comes after the writing, where you have to get your stuff to people and you have to sort of develop this platform and this audience as a writer, I don't like it at all. Not even a little bit. Like I'm a gregarious person, but I was an inside kid. I didn't go outside and play with kids because it was hot and it was mosquitoes. You have to be outside a lot when you want people to buy your books or to listen to your podcast. You got to post on social media. They want to talk to you live. They want you. It's just like, it's a lot. just kind of find,
It is.
I like doing this. I like chit-chatting with you guys. It's a lovely experience. But then my publicist wants me to post on social media. She wants me to do a live video on Facebook. And I'm just like, but why? Like, it's a book right here. Just read the book. It's in this book. I don't understand why I got to go do all this, this other stuff. It's a bit exhausting. Okay, I'm sorry. My little rant. I'm sorry to unload on you guys. It's just a bit fun.
I find that this kind of tracks back to the last question about, the rigidity of things. Is before I was published, I didn't realize the luxury of time that I had. Like, if I didn't get a book done in a couple of years, I actually have a few books that I worked on for like 15 years. But now I write series. And so now that I'm published, I feel pressure to get the next book out because people are expecting it. Like people will write to me and say, oh, I can't wait. You can't write fast enough for me to, and it's kind of true. So all of a sudden, this thing that I did because it was a passion and it fulfilled me in such a way has become a job. And it's a wonderful job to have. I'm not saying that, but there's just the expectation on myself, is a lot different because I feel this need to produce because somebody, whether it's 10 readers or 10,000 readers, somebody's waiting for it, which I didn't have before. So I find that that's the hardest thing. And the best thing is when you get a connection with someone or someone tells you a story about how your book impacted them or what it made them feel like or how they related to it in some way. Because at the root of what I do and why I do it, it's about connection. It's about connecting with people and having this sort of wonderful universal humanality of sharing experiences and sharing stories. I mean, our culture is built on stories, and it's so wonderful to be able to share that with people and have people enjoy it.
True, very true. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say the best thing about being an author is, like others have said, is the response from people who have read my book. And that became quite poignant for me when I received a photo a few months ago from a friend in Kenya, because they were doing a pageant to raise awareness about albinism. And I had sent 10 copies of my book to Kenya with someone since she was doing some work there. And I received this photo back saying, this book is being passed around the Miss Albinism pageant. And I was just like, that's so amazing, so many, and my fiance just looked at me and was like, ugh. Well, she's actually a journalist, and so she looks at what I do as a much harder work than what she does. Mm-hmm. So, so it was just really something. And the other piece that's been really lovely and also really difficult are it's been an opening for dialogue, and in particular with people who know me, who would then feel compelled to come back and go, well, I didn't know that about you, and then want to determine that must be who I am all the time in the world. And so, then there's that piece of, and I find this part really, really difficult, because sometimes I just want to go, that was who I was then. That's not who I am now. And that's a part of my history, but that doesn't determine how I navigate in the world. And so, so explaining those things to people is sometimes exhausting. And I would completely agree about the marketing piece.
So much.
It is a lot. And, there's some days I do it well, and there's lots of other days I don't do it well, and I'm okay with that.
I do it grudgingly. I'm going to go ahead on and say that. I do it grudgingly.
So I feel like ultimately it's about having some compassion for myself and recognizing that my work is out there in the world. I am finding opportunities to be able to showcase the work, and I just kind of want to write and live life. And if occasionally I get to read, that's awesome, you know.
So, what part of the publishing process do you find the most counterintuitive, and what do you have to force yourself to do each and every time?
I think I have the answer because I think we've all said it. Marketing.
Yeah.
It's you take someone who usually sits there and watches people, and you watch their interactions, and then they write a book, and you tell them, go talk to people. And they're like, what? No, you want me to go in the world? There's people out there. I like my computer. And
it's in the book. It's all in the book.
Oh, I agree. And self-promotion. I mean, how many of us sit around going, who the heck cares what I have to say?
mm-hmm.
It is so hard to put yourself out there. And that's to me very counterintuitive, to just go out there and promote yourself and market your books and your work. And it is kind of a nightmare. And that, I have people help me do it because I'm not very good at it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think I realized once the marketing component started that the real reason why I wanted to become a writer was I just wanted to be invited to lunch with Toni Morrison. That I really just wanted to have a reason for Toni to call me up and like, hey, this book is wonderful. Let's come and talk. We can have a slumber party. We're going to invite Jhumpa Lahiri, Chimamanda Adichie. Like, I just really wanted to meet all of the writers that have inspired me. And I think that's a big part of why I write. So then when you have someone saying, no, you have to talk about yourself and you have to go out there and develop an audience in order to even come close to meeting Toni Morrison. I'm just like, okay, I guess I'll do it. But like Kari was saying, it's just difficult to sometimes to sort of really believe that you have something that people want to hear. Although people have said they want to hear it, because before you would have marketed the book, we'd have done other stuff. People would have bought the book. They would have shown up to your readings. So obviously they want to hear what you have to say. But there are times when you're just like, even if you're a very confident person, you're just a little confused as to like, why do they care so much about finding out more about me, or why do they care? Sometimes you can hear that voice, and it's really like they want more. They want to know more. Yeah, it can be difficult to overcome that, I think.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of, this is, this week I just came off of being the featured author in my town. And there was there was a reading and Q&A at the library here. And I looked out in this room and, there's like 30 people. And I'm like, that's a lot of people, and I was given this amazing platform to talk about my activism work and to read from my book. And the piece in that is, it's like, it's really exhausting.
Yeah.
Just energetically. It's wonderful in the moment, but then there's the, how do I come down from that and take care of myself? And in my case, and then get up tomorrow morning and go meet with these clients, So, I think there's this whole piece of balance of for someone who, really believes that it's important for my work to be out there, to find a way for me to do that where I get to pick and choose how I am out in the world. And I feel like I'm really fortunate. I had an opportunity to learn from some amazing authors. I had an opportunity to be a student and learn from, some Audre Lorde and this amazing writer, Michelle Cliff, who's no longer with us. She's a Jamaican writer. And, so I look back and I wish they were both still alive so I can go, how did you do all these things? And so ultimately it's about trusting my instinct and recognizing that I can't be out 3 nights a week reading in the world because that just wouldn't work for me. So it's just like recognizing and trusting instinct.
Do you think another aspect of that is the technology and software involved in online marketing? Knowing how all of that works?
I don't necessarily know about knowing how it works. I think that, that's a part of it, but you can learn that quickly. But I do think the social media culture truly has called for a bit of cannibalism, if that's the right word. And like this idea, like I get that people don't want the book. They want you, the author. They bought the book. They've read the book. So if they're coming to your reading or they are following you on a social media or they want to be a part of your platform, they really want to connect more with you. I get that. But I kind of feel like social media culture is now so all-consuming. It's just the constancy of how much you have to put yourself out there just to be kind of in a little bit way seen from the periphery.
So it's the sheer amount of work then, the sheer amount of ongoing daily grind.
Exactly, okay. That's what it is. And I don't know if authors who came to prominence before social media sort of became this all-encompassing thing. I don't know if they had a version of that in their own way, just not with social media, or if it seems like it's more intense and it's more exhausting because of the rules of engagement now that social media has created. I would be curious to ask like someone who developed themselves and became established as a writer before social media, like if they have a same, oh, it's just exhausting, period. We just didn't have to do Facebook, but it was still exhausting. I just wonder if they have those same stories.
It's definitely an interesting question to think about, and definitely not something that we can answer without that, because they had their media rounds. You're spending 2 months on the road, exactly. But it's 2 months on the road and you get 2 months off the road. Exactly. And with social media, if you're not on every day, you're either non-existent in the social media sphere. Or I want to say they think you've gone away when you haven't gone away. You're writing or you're with your kids or something along those lines. So in that respect, it is more immediate, I think, than what we have seen before whenever writers got big.
Yeah, and I would say that, we are part of an instant gratification world at this point. And that's the piece about the marketing through all of the different platforms that however an author chooses to navigate those platforms, it's just recognizing that we get to determine when we turn the switch off for a while and go back to writing or living life.
I think that goes back to what you were saying, Natalie, about taking care of yourself.
Absolutely.
You got to get off the wheel at some point for even a short period of time.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Very true.
And how much do current events affect your storyline? Do you ever find real life events seem to mimic something that you wrote in the past?
Well, I write historical, so that's kind of it's an interesting question for me. However, I do see parallels in history as to what is going on today. And that's why I sort of developed a platform about empowered women, because the women that came before us, a lot of the women that I talk about in my blog and that I write about, they had incredible obstacles to overcome, and just being themselves was a challenge. Annie Oakley, for instance, worked in a completely male-dominated world, and she kicked some butt. She was really the very best at what she did, and so I think that it kind of it kind of parallels to current things that are going on. But and I like to find that when I'm researching things in history, when I'm researching a book or a story, I do like to try to find the parallels, because I think things go in cycles, and what was relevant then can still be relevant today, and vice versa.
And I would say with my writing, definitely current events play into the writing. For example, when the Me Too movement opened up, I was near the end of writing my memoir, and I think it was out at an editor at that point. And all I could think is, and those are some of the themes in my book, and I just can't even deal with the Me Too thing right now, And ultimately, I did write a piece about that, but it certainly had a significant impact. And in addition, I wrote another. I had something come across my social media feed about an interview with the late Dick Gregory with some radio hosts, and that in the segment there's this whole piece of what happens. What was the question? Oh, where do albinos go after high school? And I was like, what? That's and it was caused this huge furor and in the albinism community. And I ultimately wrote an open letter that was published through on Medium. And it, was really significant for me to say, I see this, it certainly had a significant impact on me, and how do I share that with the world? And I recognize in my writing, and given my activism nationally and internationally in the albinism movement, that much of my writing will inevitably be in response to some degree to current events.
I kind of think that if you're writing words in a current time, you're going to reflect that current time in some way. So even if it's indirectly, if you are not intentionally saying, I'm going to write this piece that highlights a strong, independent woman in the Me Too movement. If you are a strong, independent woman in the Me Too movement, if you have experienced harassment or sexual misconduct, that's going to find its way into your writing, whether you write overt memoir, nonfiction, personal essay, or whether you write fiction. I think we are products of our environments, and we come into our environments with our own personal bent and experiences. So I'm certain that if you went and read something I wrote when I was 24 and in my first writing workshop, it would probably make me cringe at how immature I was and naive, but you would probably see within that writing, whether it's poetry, whether it was a short story, you will see in that piece of writing reflected something that was going on at that time that informed the character, informed the whole reason why I wrote it. So yeah, I would say it's probably impossible not to have. Again, I think the personal is the political. You can't separate the two. So yeah, I would say that, yeah, I think for most of our writing, you would see some sort of traces of the time period and what were big, huge topics or issues during that time period.
Y'all are fantastic and a lot deeper than my answer. Because, I mean,
Yes,
like, mine goes along the lines of, well, before Harry met Meghan, Dante met Olivia in my book. And so it goes along those lines. That's one of them. My current with the science fiction, when someone creates a world that has magic in it, everybody tries to come up with a way for magic to happen. And with an engineering background way back, a long time ago, and I have enough physics to be dangerous is what I like to say. So when I think about how magic can happen and this and that, I start thinking about along those lines, and I start going down that path, and I'm like, well, how could you manipulate? How could you do this and that? And I've actually seen some actual physicists doing some things that I've thought about, and I'm like, oh, hey, an actual physicist thought the same lines as me. So I just get excited. Sorry, I'm not very deep on that one.
Oh no, that was deep. That was quite insightful. What are you talking about?
This brings us to the last question, which is, how do you think education, literature, and travel advance society, break down walls, and help people discover what they have in common?
Understanding. That's the biggest thing right there. It's understanding. When you're open to understanding someone else's point of view, when we can move past the perception of the fact that I disagree with something you say does not mean I dislike you. It just means I think a different way. When we can move into the position of, oh, we like each other. We have all these things in common, and there's this one thing that we just need to forget and not talk about when we're together, because we like each other, or we can understand where that person comes from. Even if we don't agree with what their opinion is, we can understand where it comes from. We can move more towards a togetherness, which just brings us to a world I would rather live in, which is a lot nicer, a lot friendlier, a lot more accepting of everybody and everything. So understanding is mine.
I think there was this article I read in some magazine years ago that did this research saying that the study of literature in high school and college curriculum increases compassion and empathy. I'm not sure how the research was handled. I don't know how the data was presented, but I do remember reading that there was some scholarship centered around why keep your liberal arts program, why keep your English master's degree program, whatever. And I would say when I read that, it resonated with me because I have been a high school and middle school literature language teacher most of my adult life. And also I'm a writer, and I'm an avid reader. Like, I love to read. And I think the biggest thing that it helps us do, education and the study of literature in whatever your educational background has been or is, it helps you develop empathy. It exposes you to worlds that you probably would not be able to get to see on your own. And it gives you sort of the shorthand notes to what someone else's experience is like. And if you are open to being a better person and wanting to sort of, as Gandhi said, be the change that you want to see, then a good story, a book, someone else's experience is a good entry point to that. So I think it seems simple and sometimes a little touchy-feely, but I do think the benefit of it and the way it can help bring society together and help us build a better world is it simply, in its purest sense, it gives us empathy, which leads to compassion.
Well, I believe that by utilizing literature, either from an educational perspective or from a recreational point of view, that by reading, as people have said, that this allows us entry into the lives of other people. And for me, it helps to provide me with a sense of adventure. And it's through reading the words of people who wrote 100 years ago, or if it's present day dystopian fiction, that I'm inspired to say, oh, what if I could go to that place? What if I could meet those people? And in many cases has prompted me to do so. And so I look at it as I'm granted a passport for adventure through literature, through education. And that just opens the world in a more expansive way. It allows me to engage with people that I might not necessarily engage with, to gain an understanding about their lives, their worlds. And by doing so, my life is enriched as well. Hopefully that their lives are enriched also.
Yeah, I would have to agree with everything that everybody has said. And I think in the study of literature and learning about people in the past, you know, historical, the classics, even, you know, from different cultures, and then which sort of prompted me to be interested in different people and different cultures, different countries, and then to be able to travel and to see those cultures firsthand really does create understanding. It creates compassion. It creates connection, which, you know, I think it's so important that we try to see other people's point of view. Doesn't mean we have to agree with it. Doesn't mean that, you know, it's something that we have to adopt for ourselves, but just the understanding, I think, is, you know, to Jasper's point, is very, very important. And because of technology, meaning travel, meaning, you know, the internet or whatever, the world is getting a little bit smaller, and I think it's bringing us all closer together. And that can be a really good thing. It can be a really powerful thing, because what we discover is that we're all very much the same at the very core of our humanity, whether we're different cultures, you know, religions, whatever. We're all people, you know. That's what we have in common, is our humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful words from everyone to end on. And it was an absolute pleasure talking with all of you today. All of the panelists' books are available on Amazon, and you can find the links in the description below the video, as well as links to their websites, keturahkendrick.com, karibovee.com, and their Facebook author pages, Natalie Devora Author and Oki Author. We wish you a lot of success with your books, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.